I want to start with the Justice and Policing Act. There's been an awful lot of sentiment and anger expressed in response to that brutal slaying of George Floyd. But one of the things that's come about is really a lot of momentum toward reform of the police. There's a moment here. Are you going to be in a position to take advantage of that moment and have some structural reform for the police?
Well, I thank you for your question on that very important challenge to us all. Let me just say that one of the things that contributed to some of the unease, the unrest, the anger of it all was the disparity in the coronavirus, that so many people of color had died of the coronavirus. So that kind of aggravated the situation. And I mentioned that because 3 months ago, on March 11th, there were 38 deaths from the coronavirus. Today, there are over 113,000 deaths in America from the coronavirus. And the HEROES Act, which we have put forward, goes right to the heart of the disparity in our communities of color. It is part of the answer to some of the injustice that has caused so much anger. In terms of the Justice and Policing Act, I'm very proud of the work of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Judiciary Committee. The Black Caucus has had these bills in the hopper for a long time, but now the public sentiment is so strong that we believe that we have opportunity to get them passed. And they involve, of course, no chokeholds, racial profiling must end, no-knock warrants in terms of drug cases, issues like that, issues that relate to keeping the data, having a registry of first responders who have been engaged in misconduct so they're not hired again in another jurisdiction. The list goes on about violations to be banned, about measures to be taken so that we know who was there. And we all recognize that by and large we're well served by our first responders. Public safety is a requirement that we owe the American people. But the police have to police themselves too, and we look forward to working with them as we go forward.
Madam Speaker, as we've talked about the various fiscal stimulus bills that you've really initiated, you've emphasized repeatedly how important it is to be bipartisan. We understand that the Senate Republicans now are working on their version of some police reform. There's even reports that the White House is working on maybe an executive order. Is this something that you want to work across the aisle and come up with a joint response on?
Always, always. It's always so much stronger if we can work in a bipartisan way. So far, what we've seen from the Senate is weak, but nonetheless a recognition that there has to be some change. But I'll leave that up to the Karen Bass, our distinguished chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as the chair of the Crime Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee, working with Jerry Nadler, the chair of the full Judiciary Committee. I'll leave it up to them to have their interactions with the Republicans in the House as well as in the Senate, and hopefully with the White House. We do have an issue that relates to a qualified immunity doctrine that protects some police officers found to be engaged in misconduct from any, shall we say, exposure from families that are affected or lawsuits. So that is one area that has perhaps an area where we'll have some differences, but hopefully on the others we will not, and that we'll be able to find common ground. American people deserve that. American people expect it. American people are watching. We want to show them we've heard you, we see you, we've listened, we've learned how important this is to you, and we're going to do something about it. That's the question I was asked by George Floyd's brother yesterday when he came to testify before the Judiciary Committee in the Capitol. He said, I have one question for you. Will this become law? What makes you think so? What is different now? Well, different is the complete public awareness of the injustice of it all and the complete public outcry for change.
Any of us who've seen the video, not just of George Floyd, but also of other instances of police misconduct, know that there are some police we really have to correct. We have to get rid of them. We have to amend their behavior. At the same time, I'm sure you'd agree, the vast majority of police officers are doing a hard job and doing to the best of their ability. How difficult is it, on the one hand, to really police the police, but on the other hand, not be seen as really undermining them and being anti-police?
Well, I think that most of the police officers who are conducting themselves in a way that could be viewed publicly as responsible do not want to be painted with a brush of some bad apples that might be there in the mix. And so, again, policing the police is a responsibility that they have. But I also think that we have to recognize there's some racism that has to be addressed in our society as well as within our law enforcement community. And when we can rid ourselves of that, we'll go a long way to having justice in our policing.
Are the police unions a help or a hindrance in the reform of policing?
I've had a conversation with the president of one of the police unions, and they put out a very positive statement about our legislation. We didn't know what they might say, but it was very, shall we say, open to what we were proposing, ready to have the discussions. And again, as you say, overwhelmingly, police officers are there to protect us. I think they see their role as guardians, not warriors. And we just have to hope for the best in that regard and invite them to the table so they can be part of the discussion. Some places, it's different. Some places, some of the union officials have been very, shall we say, more protected than they need to be of bad conduct. But we have to make those distinctions. But right now, we want to pass the HEROES Act.
Sorry.
I said right now we want to pass the HEROES Act.
And I want to talk about exactly that. But before that, if this bill did become law, would it have prevented, you think, George Floyd's murder up in Minneapolis?
You know, it was something, it just was explosive. It was pivotal. It was an inflection point. Use any term you want. It has made a tremendous difference. But I think for people to see a person martyred right before our very eyes, 8 minutes and 46 seconds is a long time. It's not something you accidentally hit somebody, and it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I think, and when you see the numbers of people who have turned out again and again across the country for weeks and across the world, it somehow or other, his death was the tipping point, and his family sees it that way, although, as you probably know, they miss him very much and they'd rather he be here. But nonetheless, they don't want his death to be in vain. So we have to make sure that that our legislation is passed, so as they asked, other lives will be saved.
Madam Speaker, let's talk about that HEROES Act that you've mentioned a couple of times now. We heard from Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin yesterday that he agrees some form of fiscal stimulus is needed. There has to be more done. Where are you in negotiating with Secretary Mnuchin, the White House, the Republicans on the Senate side, to get moving on some version of the HEROES Act?
Well, we believe that the HEROES Act that we put together is a very focused, disciplined, necessary set of provisions, and that everything in there is something, except for one thing, OSHA standard protection for our workers in the workplace. Everything else in the bill has been something Republicans have voted on before. As I've said to you before, when the Republicans put forth their bills, people say that's a first offer. When I put forth my bill, they say, why isn't she doing it in a bipartisan way? Well, we invite, ours is a first offer too, we invite their participation. But it's absolutely essential. And if we don't do it, it's going to cost more. Not only did Secretary Mnuchin say that we need additional bipartisan legislation, the chairman of the Fed is, again, he reiterated what he said before. And what he said before and now is elected officials have the power to tax and spend and to make decisions about where we go as a society should direct our collective resources. I think it may require Congress to help as people are losing their jobs, and as he said, many of whom will not get their jobs back. So whether we're talking about testing, tracing, treating, isolation to end this virus so that we can open up our economy, whether we're talking about honoring our heroes, our healthcare workers, our teachers, our transit workers, our first responders, our food providers, the list goes on, by helping state and local governments, whether it's about putting money in the pockets of the American people with unemployment insurance and direct payments, with food stamps, etc. This is all necessary, and now, and all of it voted by the Republicans before. It's bigger now because more is needed. But if we don't get that testing done, we're not going to defeat this virus. And we don't have a vaccine now, and we don't have a therapy. God willing, we pray, and we have great minds at work working on it. But we do have testing. And the administration should take our strategic plan to do that, to open the economy, to bring people back to work, send kids back to school, and get the job done for the American people.
And what you say about testing and also, by the way, contact tracing may be as important as ever as we begin to get some reports from Florida, from Texas, from Arizona, from California, that in fact maybe the COVID-19 is gaining steam in some locations. We've heard from Secretary Mnuchin just today saying we will not shut the economy no matter what. Do you agree with him? And are we in a position with the testing and the tracing to be able to confidently say we won't have to shut it back down?
Well, we have to open it up safely. Because otherwise we're just going to go back and forth on this, and people will lose their lives. And the American people overwhelmingly have said they're more concerned about their health care, their good health, than going back to work, although everybody wants to go back to work or back to school. That's not even a discussion, but how to do it safely is a discussion. So to your question, what is a negotiation? Well, originally they said never, nothing, we're not doing anything. And then they said, well, we'll do $1 trillion. It's not enough. And then we don't know when we're going to do it, but we need to do something soon. So they've been changing their tune on it, and the American people will demand. We have bipartisan support across the country for everything that we are doing. And I'll remind you that everything we're doing for state and local government to honor our heroes, to keep their jobs, costs less than half of what the Republicans had in their tax scam to give the tax cut to the wealthiest people in America. 83% of the benefits going to the top 1%. This is a stimulus to the economy. Go look at speaker.gov/Heroes Act and see what this means to you where you live, in your state, in your county, in your township or city. Again, half of the tax cut.